Hello and welcome back to the Studio Ghibli journey. Myself, Luke, RazorwireReviews and Daisuke over at Daisuke Beppu. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, not too bad today. It is the early afternoon for me and the late night for you over in Tokyo. So we're going to kind of work through our time differences and sit down and talk about another Studio Ghibli film. And I think I speak for both of us in saying thank you to everyone who watched the previous one. I think it has like over 1,000 views, which is really cool, and people seem to enjoy it. So thank you very much. It's fun to kind of talk about these films. That's why we do YouTube. It's just to talk about films. So again, thanks for watching that. And in this one, we're going to be talking about your favorite. Is it your favorite overall?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Either way, it's one of your absolute favorites. So I thought it would be nice to start with my favorite, and then the second one we could talk about one that you have the most passion for. But I have quite a lot of passion for it too, and it is Kiki's Delivery Service from 1989, another Hayao Miyazaki film. So what are your memories of this one? When did you first come to this film? Was it when it was released or later on?
It was very soon after the release, but I never saw it in the theater. I saw it, I think, on a VHS tape, and it was I actually saw it in Japanese, and I also saw it in the English dub on two separate VHS tapes.
Okay.
And I was just so taken with it then, and my feelings haven't changed. So yes. How about yourself? What was your first encounter with this film?
Well, I talked about it before, how I kind of got into Studio Ghibli. It was very staggered throughout my life. I saw Porco Rosso, a bit of it when I was a kid. Later on in my 20s, I saw Princess Mononoke. And then many years after that, I saw Porco Rosso for the first time. And I thought, okay, I need to see more from this director. So I was rolling through all of Miyazaki's films. And this one, because I was looking at the posters and some of the synopsises and things like that. And this one just seemed like a very light, fluffy kind of film. It didn't seem like it was going to be as epic or as involved or dramatic as some of the other films I'd seen up until that point. So for me, I just viewed it as, oh, it's that kind of like kids film. Maybe I should just get it out of the way. You know, it's not 90 minutes long, hour and a half roughly. And I thought, I can kill some time today. I'll get this one out of the way and then move on to the other ones I'm really looking forward to see. So I was completely blown away by this film. And I don't think it's a film that really is meant to blow away anyone or to really stagger them or anything. But for me, my expectations were so low. It was like I could only go up. And so I was like, wow, that was great. I loved it. I completely fell in love with it and wasn't expecting it at all. It looked nice. I mean, it looked like it was nice animation, cute story, but I wasn't expecting it to have the weight that it did. And I don't even think there's that much weight to it, really, but I just think it's deceptively, I don't know, there's something about it, I think, that isn't immediately apparent on the surface. And we'll talk about that as we get into it, I suppose. But yeah, I saw it maybe 5 years ago, something like that, and it was love at first watch, for sure. And I've seen it a few times since.
When you saw the film, was it the English version? Was it the Japanese version?
No, I should always reiterate that for me, it's always the preference is the Japanese version, or in any case, of a foreign film, it's the original language that I prefer to watch. Obviously, we talked about in the previous episode that I watch Porco Rosso in English primarily, but that's like a one-off case because that's kind of my favorite actor, Michael Keaton, and everything. I haven't watched this one in the English dub. I might do if I show it to my sister, who is 10 at the minute. So I'm not sure she could sit through the subtitled film. I mean, I'm sure she could, but I think that English would be easier for her, and she might enjoy the film. But I flipped through the English dub, and it's not quite for me. But maybe we'll talk about that later on as well.
Sure.
Yeah, the Japanese version for me for sure is the way to go.
Fantastic. I agree. Yes.
What's the Japanese title of this one? I think I asked you that with Porco, if you could.
Oh, sure. The Japanese title for Kiki's Delivery Service is Majo no Takyubin. So Majo is the word witch. Mm-hmm. So it translates literally as witch's delivery service.
Oh, okay.
Witch's delivery service. So Majo no Takyubin. Yes.
Mm. So I think this was based on a children's book, right? the
Yes.
story. Yeah, I read that very briefly that the film is quite different from the book, and that the book is very episodic and just kind of just nice stories, no real conflict, no point where she loses her powers like she does in the film, and that the author was not entirely happy with that as far as the film was concerned.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Eiko Kadono, I think.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So I've no experience with those. I mean, for me, I'm such a completist of these things. I'd like to go and read that book, if I could, in some way, shape, or form. Like Nausicaa, which we may cover. I'm not sure if we're going to do that one, but I was so in love with that, I went and read the entire 1,000+ page, manga. So that's how much I like to go back to. It's interesting to me and to see the differences as well. So I would be intrigued, and I know that there has been a live action version of this film, which
yes,
doesn't look that good. I mean, I don't want to judge on appearances, but I don't know if it has the same feel. Do you have any knowledge of that whatsoever? Or?
I haven't seen it.
No, okay.
So
yeah.
I know what you're referring to, though. Yes,
It's a fairly recent film. The past few years, I think they made the
that's right. Yes,
live action version. So the story of Kiki is a very simple one. Like often when I'm reviewing a film or something, I think, how do I sum this up? Very simple. Kiki is a young witch, and the tradition is that when a young witch reaches 13, she travels out away from home, finds a town, and spends a year in training. So she does that, and that's the film. It's a very simple plot, and it's about her trying to find her way. Who is she going to become? What is she going to be? And all of those things. I think it's a really great coming of age story. Like that is literally the driving force of this film is a young girl coming of age, I think.
Yes. And she is what's her age again? It's 13?
Yeah, 13 at least.
Yes.
From the subtitles that I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is obviously right. She's no longer a young child, and yet she's not quite an adult yet. So she's just entering her teenage years. So it's a pretty significant part or time in her life that she is now having to become independent for the first time. So yes, that's exactly. I think your capsule description of the film is 100% accurate.
Yeah, I'm thinking that now that we mentioned that the age is that something that I get from the film is that it obviously is set in, at least not this century, but last century, and we have cars and things like that. But the whole story feels like a very old tale, if that makes sense. And I was thinking hundreds of years ago. I'm not sure about this. Again, I'm really not good with history, but from what I understand, going back a couple of hundred years, maybe even further, around 13 is probably more of an age that we see now as 16, 17, 18, where people were growing up sooner than they do now, if that makes any kind of sense. So
that's interesting.
But yeah, but anyway, that aside, I think that, yeah, like you say, 13, it's kind of, you're not quite a kid anymore. You're not an adult. It's that in-between phase. And for most of us around that age, I think it's, you're heading into the final few years of school and things are changing, and you start to kind of evaluate your life and where you're going. And so this kind of fictional idea of going out on your own and just throwing the kids out into the deep end is very much as right, go figure it out, and there's no real plan either. I rewatched this last week, and Connie was saying, well, what is she supposed to do? Because I think it said that her mother says, oh, she hasn't learned any of my potions fully yet, or something like that. Because at the beginning, Kiki leaves earlier than planned because she hears that there's going to be a full moon. So she feels like this is the night for me to leave. So I'm leaving a little bit early. She's really excited to leave, but she doesn't have a plan. She has nothing. It's just fly around on her broom and find a town. Just settle down, which is a very scary thought for me if I was to put that into actual terms and imagine myself doing that at age 13. But I think that just makes the coming of age element even more gripping, I think, to imagine yourself in somewhat of a similar situation.
Oh, I completely agree. And also, it's very indicative of her character as well. At least at the very beginning of the film, she's very, I don't know, for lack of a better word, she seems to be quite independent-minded. If she wants to do something, she'll tend to gravitate towards that and be energetic and enthusiastic about that. And so she's really into the moment, so to speak. So and you can tell that immediately in the first scenes with her and her mother and father. So um, I agree with your assessment about that. Yeah.
I love the way the film opens. And one of my favorite films of the past few years is Boyhood. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the opening shot
Yes.
of him lying with like that, it reminds me of Kiki, even though it came before.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
love that shot of her just lying in the grass, just kind of. It kind of works with two things. One, she's kind of looking at the weather almost, and then the radio tells her about the full moon. But it also just seems like it's like a contemplative kind of, my future is coming up very quickly as far as a big change, and I just like the way that that's set visually. It just I don't know, just a character looking. I mean, it's a very easy way to show a character kind of looking off into the horizon as a way of showing that kind of feeling.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Luke, because I think you hit the nail on the head with that scene, the opening. I think the nature landscape is very lovely, of course, and of course you get the radio, which is providing the narrative impetus, if you will, providing the weather and all that. But you're right; it's the look on her face. She has her eyes open. She's laying on the ground. She's by herself. Um, and she's looking up silently in the
Mm,
sky. And what is she thinking about?
mm.
Right? That's the question. Is she just like thinking of just nothing, or is she thinking of something much deeper? And I would actually agree with you and perhaps suggest that she's thinking of something much deeper.
Yeah, there's almost like a quiet determination on her face,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like you say, very, very independent minded character. And so I think the way that that opening really works well for establishing her sense of character is that she is very actively saying, I'm going tonight. Like, it's not like her parents are saying, come on now, you're 13, you got to get out there. She's like, no, I'm leaving tonight. Like her dad's like, hey, we're going camping. She's like, sorry, like, this is my moment. I'm leaving. So her
Yeah.
excitement and throwing herself into it, and even the scene when she takes off, and I love that effect in the animation when she's holding onto the broom and her kind of hair ripples. And it's kind of this, you get the feeling of the kind of power coming out, and then she takes off, but she kind of like hits the tree on the way off. So she's not completely ready, So I like that. It's a nice little touch.
Yeah, the bells, right? It's the bells.
Yeah.
And there's the comment, right? Oh, I'm going to miss hearing those bells. Yes.
Yeah. And that's a great way to open the film. And we set her right off on her journey, and we see her with the other witch, who's kind of the more established character, who is I forget what she says that she does already, but she's there. Her cat is on the broom and looking very snooty, stuck up.
She likes to fly, in peace and quiet. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
we should mention Gigi, the black cat character who
Yes.
joins her for the ride and is a talking cat, and that plays a big part of the film too. I think the relationship between the two and the fact they can talk to each other. How do you feel about the character of Gigi?
Oh, I love Gigi. I think the character of Gigi is just one of the great characters, and the development between Kiki and Gigi is so important.
Yeah,
And what happens to that relationship is incredibly important. It's so subtle. It's kind of it's got that uh, Gigi is cute, so it has that kind of cute, fluffy doll kind of thing, and very what's the word? Merchandisable. I don't know if that's a word,
sure. Yeah, okay.
uh, but it's so much more than that, obviously. And
Yeah,
Gigi is such a important aspect of this film, so important. Um, and so, yeah. So it's good that you mentioned Gigi now, because the relationship between Kiki and Gigi here is one that's playful. Gigi obviously is a bit. He's got a bit of an attitude, a friendly one, of course,
yeah.
and kind of dry humor. And it's a good counterpoint to Kiki's kind of earnestness and innocent excitement. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really simple point I'd never really thought of. You're totally right. Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it's a nice complementary relationship there as far as their attitudes and personalities. And have
Mhm.
you ever owned cats?
No, No, I'm not a cat person. I'm afraid.
Oh man. Well, I am very much for almost my entire life actually, since I was about 6 or 7. My mum got a cat. Anyway, so we have cats, me and Connie. So it's very much like a part of my life, and the way that I see Gigi to me is almost like that's what a cat would be like if they had a way to express themselves in a human speech. There's that just kind of, I don't know. You just there's a how do I put it? Cats just have this look in their eyes and their faces sometimes where they just it's that attitude. It's just like when you compare dogs and cats, dogs are just, in my experience, a lot more kind of, they're loving, they're kind of unconditional love. They're very just kind of, obviously they get angry and bark, but I never really get that feel from dogs that cats have, where it actually seems like they're looking down at you at points, or they have kind of an attitude about the situation. It's just, but for me to see that characterized in a films is great, and I think Gigi's a
Yeah.
great example of that.
Yeah, and the way that the relationship develops is just so it takes a number of twists and turns actually that I find quite profound. But we can talk about that when we're ready to, I suppose.
Yeah, I love the way that he is animated because um, there's certain elements where it's like very cat-like, like the purring and meowing or whatever. But then you'll have it when he's more just, quote unquote human and speaking like
Mm.
that. And then when you see the other cats, I don't know, it just seems like they're more just normal cats, which I guess plays into, the relationship and how she can speak to him. But I like the difference there, and the animation is really well done in terms of the way they designed him and so on. And it would have been, I don't know how the film would work without him. I mean, you could argue that it would. I mean, there's a lot that goes on that he's not involved in, but I think that having him there with Kiki just, I don't know, it makes her story and journey feel more complete. It would almost feel too lonely if she was flying off on her own. It's just nice. I don't know, it just feels nice for her to have that companion throughout everything, through the ups and downs.
Yes, and I think that's very important to point out because this is very interesting because right, Kiki during her journey and during her time as we see her in the film, she never seems to, well, actually there's one point maybe towards the end, but apart from the ending, she never is seen wanting to go back to her parents. She never mentions, oh, I want to go back to my mom and dad, or she never says anything about, in fact, she says the opposite. She says, I can't go back and not have anything to show for myself. And so there's never any kind of scene where she is seen missing her mom and dad, except at the very end. There's a little bit at the end, but that's, I think, an epilogue kind of thing. But
Yeah,
for the bulk of the film, we never see that. Instead, we see her relationship with Gigi. And so the relationship with Gigi, I would say, is representative of a lot of things, but I think primarily it's that idea of something about her childhood, something about her home, where she came from, and the fact that the relationship with Gigi alters quite significantly during the course of the film, I think, is very significant because it comes at a point where she is truly lost, right? And so Gigi, I think, is so important, and therefore to have the character of Gigi there is is uh, is so critical. I can't imagine the film without Gigi. I
yeah.
can't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another good point actually, that she never really, at least verbally, pines for home,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's almost a kind of, I don't know if you could read into it as a message, but I think that when we're faced with things that are a little bit scary in life, especially when growing up at that age, the impulse is to go back home, or whether literally or otherwise, where it's like, okay, I'm done. I'm not gonna push forward with this. It's too scary, and she just pushes forward the whole time. And I think that that's really important for young people, for people of any age actually, in anything, is to keep pushing forward, not with everything obviously, but in certain cases. And with Kiki, I think that, yeah, that's an interesting point. I never considered that either, that she doesn't really audibly, because there's many points she could do it. She could say to the woman who works at the bakery, "Oh, I miss my parents," or she
Yeah.
could say to the other young girl who she becomes friends with, "Oh, I wish I could go home," and that doesn't really come into it. And I think that's yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting point I'd never considered either.
Well, I think that goes towards her natural inclination for being a bit of an independent
Yeah,
spirit, so to
yeah,
speak. And I think the independence, I think, is perhaps it's a good thing because it gives her a kind of strength. But also it can be a negative part of her character, especially when we see her and her interactions with the other kids
yeah,
in the town,
yeah,
and she seems to be very standoffish. So perhaps it's a bit too strong,
yeah.
and so yeah. So again, such a complicated film, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, and to clarify, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do all the time. It's fine to kind of, to kind of say, okay, I'm done, or I'm going to go home, or I'm going to, quote unquote, quit something. But I often find that if you push through something that seems difficult, you break through into something that can be even better or can be kind of beneficial, I think. So
Mm.
again, I hadn't really thought about that, but it's an interesting point that she doesn't really even consider, at least out loud, going home, because that would be all too easy. I'm sure that her parents would say, "Sure, come home. There's no problem." But it's and they talk about at the beginning that I think her mother says that it's kind of an old tradition. It's almost like it's outdated at this point, but the family keeps doing it, and Kiki is obviously very much on board for doing that. But I do find it interesting how she doesn't have like a specific skill set or trade in mind as far as being a witch. I don't know how many you could come up with, but it's interesting how she uses just her broom and her ability to fly to create kind of a trade for herself in the delivery service. How do you feel about that element of the film when she sets up in the bakery where she kind of meets a very nice woman who takes her in and lets her use the attic loft room and to operate her delivery service out of?
I think that's really important. I'm so glad you bring it up because
Well, it's the
in
title of the
this,
film, so delivery
yeah,
service.
because it's so great. Because what it does is, first of all, her talent, if you will, is flying. But as we can kind of guess in this world that the Kiki and all these characters inhabit, the fact that she is describing her talent as being flying, I think is very interesting because in this world of Kiki's delivery service, I think, right, I think all witches are able to fly, right? And so the fact that she can fly isn't necessarily a special thing
Exactly, yeah.
among the witches, right? Because all the witches can fly. I think. I mean, we see the young witch at the beginning after the opening credits, and so it's not like Kiki is the only person who can fly, and we don't necessarily get a sense of Kiki being a particularly fast flyer or
No.
she's a racer or something like that. No, no, we don't get that sense. It's just she can fly, but so it's like she takes something that is okay, let's assume therefore that flying isn't necessarily, I mean, she's not the best in the world at flying, let's put it that way,
She's quite clumsy
right?
at times.
Exactly. And yet she uses it to her advantage
Yes.
in a very positive way. And so I find that message to be very inspiring and interesting. In other words, taking a talent that I think is quite definitely a talent, but maybe you're not the best person in the world
Hmm.
with respect to that particular talent, and yet you can still use it in a way that is very positive. And I think that's a really nice setup that this film has.
Yeah, I mean, you beat me to that thought. It definitely is something I think of with this film, and it's okay, you can't do that, so what can you do? And maybe
Mm,
focus on that, and maybe you can find something that you didn't think you could do within your already existing skill set. So yeah,
mm,
that's a really good part of the story, where she takes that, and I think the only time we see another witch, at least another young witch, is that scene at the beginning, and she's flying. So it
yes.
establishes that the status quo that other witches fly as well, and that's not, again, like you say, a particularly notable skill for a witch to have. Um,
Mm. What do you think? Let's go. Let's just focus on the character of Kiki for a moment. Um, what do you think? How should I put it? Um, what are well, let me put it this way. Yeah. What do you think are the best traits of Kiki, and what do you think are the not so good traits of Kiki as a character?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you kind of covered it before. I think maybe she's almost too kind of independent in the sense that she doesn't. Well, she does let her guard down in some cases, but with the young boy, Tombo, is it?
Tombo, yes.
Yeah, like he seems like a very nice young man who wants to be friends with her, and she very much is kind of pushing that away. And yeah, because at the beginning she arrives into the town where she settles, and she's trying to make a good impression on her broom flying through the town, and she ends up just being completely clumsy and crashing into cars and stuff. And so she gets in trouble with her local policeman. And then Tombo spots this and kind of makes a distraction to kind of get her out of the out of trouble. And he runs, oh, I helped you out, and she just doesn't even show any signs of it's like, yep, no, whatever. She's very so she's a little bit cold to that for some reason. So I guess that would be kind of a negative trait. I want to talk a little bit more about that later on, I suppose, with a certain element of of her character. Maybe we can talk about it now, I don't know. But positively, I would say that independently, that's another. It's interesting because that is a thing that works, as you say, in the positive and in the negative in some cases. So I really just like the inherent niceness of her character, which isn't a very eloquent way to say it, but and one of my favorite kind of parts of the film is when she delivers, or she's supposed to deliver I forget what it is, a pie from an old woman to her granddaughter. So she turns up at the old woman's house and she's just getting ready to cook the pie. So anyways, that relationship between Kiki and the old woman is just a very nice relationship that develops. It isn't really a big part of the story, but it's one of the most touching ones to me because this old woman spends this time to make this pie for her granddaughter. Kiki delivers it, and the granddaughter's like, "Oh, I hate these things. Oh, I tell her not to send them." And you just see that kind of, it's just an awful. But Kiki appreciates kind of it so much when the old woman makes her a cake at the end, and says, "Well, I got to get you something." So it's just a very nice character, and again, not really, not really an eloquent way to put it, but I like her niceness. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more interestingly than I can.
No, no, I think you explained it very well. I really like that. She is very nice, but I think her niceness is, I don't think she means to be selective, but it comes off as being very selective, right? Because she isn't appreciative of Tombo's efforts after he basically saves her
Hmm.
from being arrested. And she is quite very angry at him actually, which is a little bit of an interesting reaction. Although I think I can understand uh, it's I guess I don't know if actually I don't quite know what it is except is it that thing where maybe you're you meet other kids your age for the first time and you feel a little bit
Yeah, it might be that.
yeah
We can't ignore the fact that boys and girls, that's definitely, I think, and part of it perhaps. And
yeah
part of it is probably that she feels like I don't want to be saved, or I don't want help. Again, she's very determined and trying to be an
yeah
independent young woman. But yeah, I
yeah
think perhaps she might see it as an advance, in terms of a boy wanting to ask her out or something. Maybe that's part of it. But
I think also it's also that she tends to be friendlier with older people,
yes, very much. Yeah.
right? And she tends to be a little bit more standoffish with people her age or around her age. And that seems to suggest to me, I mean, it could be suggestive of many things, I suppose, but I think one way to look at it would be maybe she's just more comfortable talking and getting along with older people,
Yeah.
right? So Osono and the bakery, right? Tombo helps her, and she's a bit offended by that. Yet,
Yeah.
and Osono, the baker's wife, offers to give her room and board.
Yeah.
And that's basically how, and she doesn't get offended. In fact, she's welcome to that. So it's basically two separate occasions of people giving her help, and she gives different reactions to them. And
Yeah.
I think I think it has something to do with the fact that Kiki tends to be more. Tends to get along with older people, which is interesting because we think back to the very beginning of the film, and remember she's actually talking with some of her friends her
Yeah.
age, and they're saying, oh, maybe you're going to go to some disco or something, or
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of playful talk. So I always find that really fascinating, but I guess it just comes down to, that, I mean, that's how interesting human nature can be. It doesn't have to be the straight
Yeah. Yeah.
being consistent all the time. Sometimes you just feel like we just want to talk to some people, and other times we just feel like, I don't want to talk to you. What are you talking? Why are you doing this? I love that kind of the honesty of being inconsistent. That's just such a human thing.
Yeah. And we could look at maybe hormones as well, and just the process of growing up and how you can get a little bit moody at times. And there's a scene when, Tombo finally gets his wish and gets to hang out with her a little bit. And despite herself, she enjoys spending time with him a little bit, and she kind of thinks he's okay. And they're sat down, and his friends turn up. And suddenly she's like, nope, I'm leaving. Bye. She's just done with it. So it's that kind of a little bit of a mood swing going on there. And I think I'll segue now, since we're still talking about her character. This is like something that really struck me when I first saw the film. And I don't think this is really intended by Miyazaki, maybe not even at all. But when she starts to lose her powers, to lose her confidence, to me, what I felt, or at least what I was relating it to, was, I don't say depression, but just a little bit of that kind of the more negative feelings you can feel when you grow older. When I was around 13, 14, I first started experiencing, I don't know if it's depression or what, but I just feeling really low. And there's a scene when she just goes in the bed and just falls down and doesn't want to do anything. And I felt like that when I was a kid. So I just was so much more drawn in, because I kind of almost felt part of myself in that. And I think that's part of it too. But I don't think it really is a kind of a depression issue or anything like that. But I do think that it is about these negative feelings that can kind of overwhelm you at times. And as you're growing up through those I think that's probably the most formative period of anyone's life, is when they're going from 11, 12 through to late teenage years. It's like a lot of changes are going on in your body, your head, your mind, everything.
Yes. And this is a very interesting thing. Maybe I can just ask you this now. You bring up the key point of the film. I think it's such an important aspect of the film, and I'm so glad you brought it up, which is the focus on feelings and how we feel growing up.
Yeah.
And it's not always a happy time, or it's not always a clear time. Sometimes it can be very confusing.
Yeah.
It certainly was for me when I was that age. So how do you feel, therefore, about how the film wraps up around maybe the last part of the work, with the whole thing with the dirigible and the rescue of Tombo? And this comes right after the scene where I apologize for jumping around a lot, but I'm assuming people who are watching this will know the films. But this comes after the scene between Kiki and the painter, Ursula.
Yeah.
And they have a quiet bonding, which I think is very interesting. Incidentally, I think, am I right? In the Japanese version, I think those two characters are voiced by the same voice actress.
I did read that. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting. But so that I think is a very important moment, and I think it's probably the climax of the film for me, is the scene between Kiki and Ursula at night. And
I love that scene so much. It's great.
Right, and it's the climax of the film, I think. And I think the film, in terms of its thematic arc, if you will, I think it ends there. But then we get to the scene with the dirigible, and Tombo it crashes and it goes out of control, and Tombo's hanging out there on the rope and all that stuff, and it's sort of a Kiki to the rescue kind of thing. So I wonder how you feel about that setup, given what you described earlier, which I think was really well spoken by you.
it's an interesting way to end the film because it is more of an action sequence, which the film hasn't really done really up until that point. Really, it's more character stuff. But I do like how she's had the day out in the evening with Ursula, and kind of gives her a little bit of her mojo back. But it doesn't mean that she's ready to just jump right back into flight straight away. Like she gets on that kind of is it like not even a broom? It's what's that thing that she flies at the end of the film? Completely
Oh,
just like
yeah.
yeah. So she gets on it, but she doesn't just zoom straight into the air. It takes her a while, and then she gets up, and then again she's stumbling around, bouncing off buildings and stuff. So it's that's showing you that sometimes when you get back into your rhythm, it's not going to be instant. You need to kind of
Yeah.
ease back into it. But it ends very suddenly. I will say that, and I know a few people who I know who've seen it, and they think it comes out of nowhere and it ends very abruptly. And I will say, if the epilogue wasn't in the film, if it just ended there and went to credits, I would be a little bit disappointed. But I do like that we have the epilogue, which he tends to do throughout his credits of his films. We'll have like a kind of wrap up of what happened to the characters next and so on. But I think it's a really exciting sequence. I love the way that it looks and everything. But I would agree with you that the last great scene is probably actually no. I'd say the last great scene is when the old woman gives her the cake, because that made me tear up the first few times I saw it. It's such a simple thing that just moved me so much. And I wanted to bring this up actually. In his last years, Kurosawa was asked to give a list of his 100 favorite films, and he included this in that list. And he wrote a little comment for each one. And in this one, he said, "This film made me weep." And I've always wondered what was the moment that made him weep. Because for me, the most emotional moment is just that simple little cake, to Kiki or whatever it was. And just seeing that really kind old woman who, I just see my grandmother in her immediately, and seeing how appreciative Kiki is when this woman's granddaughter was just completely dismissive of the effort. So, but yeah, I think that the action scene is, I guess it's a way to show us that she gets back to kind of somewhat of a level footing.
I agree with you. Well, I with respect to the last scene with the dirigible, I think I've grown to appreciate that scene more now. When I first saw it, I thought it was a bit abrupt. I agree with you also about the scene with the old lady, and I particularly love the way that she talks to Kiki. Right? Remember, she talks about her in the third person. She says, "I want you to deliver this to a young girl who really helped me out."
Yeah.
And then there's that moment of understanding between the two of them, and there's silence, and we don't see Kiki's face, and there's a bit of silence, and then the old woman breaks that third person
Mm.
thing, and she calls her, right, she says Kiki, she calls her by her name. I thought that was a really lovely moment. But the dirigible scene, I think, works much better for me now, because it's it's a it works because of the epilogue. Let me put it that way. I think I agree with you. I think without the epilogue, I think it wouldn't work. But the fact that it has the epilogue at the end, I think is perfect, because the epilogue has I think, the most perfect way to end this film. And what I love about the dirigible scene, therefore, is that it shows that it's kind of it's it's an imperfect way to end the film. And I think that's fine, because if we just take a step back, all this film is about imperfections and about
Yeah.
dealing with our imperfections. And why can't we apply that to the act of the film itself? I mean, it's something that it doesn't really work, but yet it kind of does it well as well. So, and I think I can live with that. I think I'd live with that and just go with it. And as you say, it's an exciting sequence. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah.
But now with that, that scene, of course, does involve Gigi in a
Mm.
very significant way. So, and you were mentioning Gigi. So,
Yeah.
why don't we then go to your thoughts about Gigi, if we can?
Yeah, so I can't remember off the top of my head exactly when she discovers that she can't use her powers, and no, I think it's when Gigi doesn't respond to her, right? So she settled in this attic room at the
Yes.
bakery, and one day he comes in for food, and she's like, "Oh, you're just going to come in and leave?" And then he doesn't say anything, and she's like, "Oh, that's strange." And we've seen it slowly develop that there's another cat across the way, in the other window that he's become friendly with. He says, "I've made a new friend called Lily," which is our cat's name, which is kind of funny. And
Oh,
as that continues, then he suddenly just doesn't talk to her. And she's like, "Wait a minute!" And I think that's when she gets her broom and she realizes she can't fly anymore. She goes outside and tries to fly down a hill, and she just falls down. And it's like, "What's happening to me?" You know. And so from that point on, he doesn't speak.
Yes.
And this is something that Connie really doesn't like about the film, because for her, she wants him to speak to her again. And so we'll jump to the end where he turns up and jumps on her shoulder and meows, and it shows that he's come back to her, in a sense that he isn't just like permanently leaving and staying with this other cat, but he doesn't speak. But in the original English Disney dub, I think, don't quote me
Yes.
on that, he does speak. I don't know what the line is, but it's like, "Oh, you can hear me," or something to that effect. And then it was removed subsequently.
Yes. Yes.
So clearly, the intention is that he doesn't speak after that. But Connie really, for her, she wants to believe that they speak to each other again because she loves that relationship so much. And in my heart of hearts, I want that too. But I think it's a very important part of the story that is clearly there for a reason. But she argues that, well, in the epilogue, you can see that he sits on her broom again, and so he's back to doing uncat-like things and things like that. So she feels like that's the case. I think that's fine to imagine that if that's how you prefer to get your enjoyment out of the film. And again, deep
Yes.
down, maybe I would prefer that because I love that relationship too. But I think it's an important part of her growth in the film. What do you think about the whole him not speaking thing and how it's handled in the film?
Oh, I think it's perfect. I think it's such a perfect way to handle that feeling of of yearning for something that is no longer there, and
Hmm.
yet having to deal with this thing of growing up. I
Yeah,
think you expressed it perfectly. It's so perfect. You can't change other people, and Gigi has his life now, basically,
yeah, yeah,
and so that can't change. They're still together,
yeah.
Kiki and Gigi,
Just
but
in a different,
it's
in a different way.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly right. And so, is it better than before? Is it worse than before? Who knows? We can only imagine what the relationship will be like after the closing credits and the epilogue.
yeah.
But I think it's the perfect way to show this thing about growing up. We've all been there, right? Where we're growing up and we reach some. Or I can remember when I was growing up, and I think, oh man, I'm now at this age. I wish I were a little bit younger.
Hmm. Yeah,
I can't go back to when I was younger, when things were simpler and it was a more innocent time. And you look back on that with a sense of maybe a little bit of melancholy, a little bit of fondness for what was but no longer is there. But then you look forward and you have things to look forward to. So I love that mix, and I think that whole thing with Gigi not talking is such a perfect way of expressing that. I think Miyazaki really just a genius. Just a genius when it comes to expressing those profoundly human moments in such easy to access or to such accessible terms, like this thing with Gigi and Kiki at the end there. So I'm so glad you brought it up. Yeah.
yeah. I agree completely. It's like I won't say a loss of innocence, but a loss of youth that's just inescapable. But it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you say, looking back and maybe friends that you've had that maybe you still have, but you're never going to have that friendship as it was before. But that's
Yes.
okay because things move on, and it's just in different ways. Sometimes you lose friends, sometimes you gain friends, sometimes you keep them, and the relationship is different. And with Gigi, I think that's shown very clearly that. Again, at the epilogue, he's there with her with his little kids as well.
Yes.
I love the shot where it just cuts to him with his kittens, and his hair's all like kind of like out of place and stuff, and he just looks really stressed to be like a parent. It's just a very like human thing. If
Yes.
it
Yes.
was a cat, they would just be like sat there, just like, "Yep, it's fine. I got kids, no problem." But he just looks very stressed out, which is a very kind of
Yeah.
human expression. That's just really funny, like one shot joke. I thought was really cool. But yeah, I think that's a really vital part of the film.
Yes.
It's those two characters. It's all about them for the most part. And
Yes.
yeah, I love it. again, when I first saw it, I was like, oh no, they don't, he doesn't speak again, you know. But you know, as I watch it again and again, it feels more right to me, I think.
Yes, and I love that about this film, you know, because I think that's an example of how this film deals with the moments as we see them unfold on the screen in real time as we watch the film. And yet there are certain aspects that happen that help us think about how these moments evolve and develop once the film is over. Now, I think the idea of Gigi and Kiki at the end, I think, is a perfect example of that, right? On the one hand, we see the thing where Gigi loses his voice, or she can no longer hear him, and yet they're together at the end, and we hear his meow. And then the film kind of ends when we get those clips of them together as the closing credits roll, and then we see them together, I think, in final flight as the film ends. So,
Yeah.
but we can think now, as you described it, we can think of how their relationship will go on, if it will indeed go on, after the closing credits and after it says the end and it fades to black. What happens to their relationship? I think it's a little bit more complicated as she grows older and as he grows older. Are they going to be together all the time, or are they going to maybe drift apart naturally, perhaps? Who knows? So I think what I love about this film is that there are so many moments like that. There are so many moments where we see something unfold and it seems to be a perfect cap to the story, and yet there are certain details within that frame that help us to think that it's a much more complicated affair that occurs once the film ends. And I'll give you another example, which is since we're at the ending, the fact that the dirigible thing happens and Kiki becomes the hero. She saves the day, and everyone recognizes that she's such a great person. Oh, that's great. I love that ending because Kiki is such a likable character. And don't get me wrong, I really love that ending. But it does have a pretty, I don't know if saccharine is the right word, but everyone is suddenly so happy and
Hmm.
the credits are rolling and people are waving at her and she's smiling and everyone is her friend. It's the complete opposite of how she was treated when she first arrived at this town.
Mm.
So she becomes this hero, and things are happy. And we see Osono. You know, she's by now given birth to her child, and she has a family, and things are sunny and great. So we see that within the confines of the film in the closing credits, right? And then we get the letter that Kiki wrote to her parents,
Hmm.
and we get the voiceover. And the line that I think is so profound in that letter is the line. I don't know what the English is, but in Japanese, it's something like um, she's talking about, it's just a letter, how are you, mom and dad? How are you? And, I'm doing well. And then she says something very profound, which is, I'm paraphrasing, but what does she say? She says, 落ち込むことがあるんだけれども, which means sometimes I feel very sad. There are times when I feel down. There are times when I feel blue. But then she says at the end, 落ち込むことはあるんだけれども、この街が好きです. So she says, there are times when I feel very blue and down and lonely, but in the end, I really love this place that I'm living in. And I think that's such a perfect way to end because it leaves so much to the imagination,
Hmm.
all this time we've seen all this happy, I'm waving here, everyone is friends with Kiki, and that's great, but that doesn't tell us the whole story. The line that she gives in this letter, she's a little bit sad, there are times when she's still sad, that's amazing to me. That is such an amazing thing, and it helps me to think about her and her experiences outside of the film. And I find that to be such a gift that Miyazaki has given me as a viewer of the film. It doesn't just begin and end once the film starts and stops. It still goes on even after the film ends because I wonder, is she going to be okay? Is she going to make it okay? And of course, I'd like to say, I think yes, because I really love her as a character, but you never know with these things. And so I just think that's such a wonderful, brave, deeply honest, and very profound way to give us something that will live beyond the film's end, you know?
Yeah, and it's so much more nuanced than just yeah, everything's great now. You know, it's just
Yeah.
a little bit of ambiguity, which is what life is, and that's also I think the power of movies is the way you can just get one line that can add so much. You know,
Yeah.
it's or you know a couple of lines. You know, just that tiny little thing. And as I was saying, if the film just ended where you know she saves Tombo, yeah, it's good, but it would feel a bit abrupt, and it would, like you say, it'd be like, oh, everything's brilliant now, everything's great. You know, life doesn't always pan out that way, and you know, it's unrealistic to expect happiness all the time. And so to see her recognize that, because in the middle of the film, she doesn't know what to do with herself because she feels down, and it's just
Yeah.
it's crushing her. It's a weight on her. And then at
Yes.
the end, she realizes okay, it's yeah, I am sad sometimes, but that's you know that's the way it is, and I'm happy to kind of work through that like most people do. And you could look at this film as a very simple kids movie, but I think he has done both a great kids movie, but there's a lot of nuance there that you don't often see in this kind of
Oh,
story, but without being
yeah.
overbearing, without being like, you know, okay, this is really serious issue, like we're going to deal with real
Yeah.
emotions here. No, it's very subtle. I think it's so much of it is under the surface more than anything, and
Yeah.
that I think is the mark of a great storyteller.
Yeah, you know, I really have to bring this up. There are so many great moments in here, but you talk about the nuance and subtlety and complexity. There are two moments that always get me. There are so many moments, but I have to think of these two. The first one is at the beginning, where the father and Kiki are together in the room, and it's basically their last talk before she's going to go off. And she says to her, you know, Dad, can you lift me up one more time?
Mm.
And he says, okay, I'll give it a go. And then he goes and he lifts her up. And there's a moment where he's struggling, right? Because you know she's not like a little kid anymore. She's a little bit more grown up, so it's harder for her to pick. There's that little moment where she's struggling, but he manages to do it. I love that moment because it's so it's so heartbreaking and so heartwarming at the same time. So that's one great moment, and the other moment is
Just so
when
just before you get to that, would you say that that moves you more as a father than it would have before?
oh, most definitely,
I mean,
yes,
that has to add to it, right? That idea of,
most definitely,
and also
yes.
the idea of seeing your very young daughter kind of leaving, you know, home.
Oh no! Exactly. There is something. There's a twinge.
Mm,
It's quite moving. Oh gosh, that gets to me, and that's at the beginning of the film, you know. So I'm just that's such a great moment, and I love how it doesn't linger on that moment. It goes by in a flash, and it just
exactly.
moves on. As I just love that, and the second one is when Tombo the boy he's all dressed up and he's going to the baker to the bakery to meet Kiki and pick her up to take her to this party, and he's waiting, but she doesn't show up, and it's raining, and he's waiting outside, and he looks at his watch and he realizes that she's not gonna come there, and so we just see him will slowly walk away, dejected and we assume pretty sad. So I I love that. And it's raining and it's
Yeah.
so melodramatic and that's such a great moment. And you could feel Tombo's heart, what he must have been feeling at that moment.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah, what a great moment that is. And it's so great too because he's so nice to her even after that moment, you know?
Mm,
I
yeah.
mean, of course, it's based on a misunderstanding, right? Because obviously she wanted to go to the party, but then things happened and she became discouraged because of the granddaughter, I think, and it was raining and she fell down. So there are certain external factors, I think, that affected her ability to go, of course. But you know, it really shows a real integrity of character on the part of Tombo. You know, I mean, he was basically rejected at that moment,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Basically, he was basically rejected, and still at later in the film, he is very friendly to her, and he is still like how he always was, and he's still earnest, and he's still very energetic, and he still wants to show Kiki a little bit about himself and what it is that he loves, which is flying and flight. And
Mm,
so I that's such a what a great way to develop what could have been a pretty two-dimensional character in
yeah,
Tombo. He becomes so three-dimensional, so it's amazing. Yeah,
yeah, he has like an earnestness and
yeah.
an optimism. Like I imagine after the final scene happens, where like he's almost died on this dirigible incident, and I imagine him just being so excited about it, just being like, "That was great!" Like I could just imagine him just really looking on the bright side of it.
Well, at the end, right? Because after he's brought to the ground, he's you see him, he's waving at people, right?
I thought,
Right? So yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's amazing. I mean, he nearly died, and so he's just waving at people. So you're absolutely right. What a great observation you made. Yeah.
yeah, I just would have imagined after the credits have rolled that he would just be so excited to talk about it and be like, "Yeah, that was great. Do you see that?" Yeah, I really just like all the characters. Like even this really like the the husband who works at the bakery. I don't think he has any lines of dialogue. Not a particularly standout character, but I just even just the little moments with him I enjoy.
Mm.
Actually, one of my favorite scenes is a really subtle thing, which you would almost think, why put that in the movie? Is the first night that she, or the first morning she wakes up at the bakery.
Yes, yes, yes.
She goes down to the toilet, and
Yeah.
as she's in the toilet, he comes out for the morning, and she's waiting at the door for him to leave. Like it shows her kind of like up until that point, she's been very like again, you know, independent, moving forward, and all of that. But that shows that she still has that kind of timid side to her, where she's like, okay, I don't want to like intrude or so. And it's a very
Yeah.
small, quiet scene that again almost feels like does it need to be there, but it just adds more to her character, I think, and I just enjoy
Oh,
it.
I love that scene. I'm so glad you brought it up. It's I always feel that way. If you're staying at someone, maybe you're a
Yeah,
guest at someone's
yeah,
house, you have to wake up in the middle of the night, maybe to go to the restroom or something. It's like, oh, I don't want to make any noise, or I don't want anyone to see me. And if someone's there, I'll just go back to remember. I've always I thought I was the only one, but I always felt that way, and it's
yeah. It's such a human moment, that scene. I
yeah.
think just very relatable. I think to most people. Yeah, like you say, staying over someone's house is where that awkward moment. Like, I didn't even think about that, but I just like how it's just a very quiet scene, no dialogue. Just
And you bring up the baker, which is such a great it seems like such a secondary character, and he is, but he is just another example of another theme in this film, which is I can't explain it very well, but it's like uh, appearances can be deceptive, perhaps, because he seems to be this really stern, mean-looking guy, and yet he's such a nice person. And it's like we see this in many other parts of the film, in so many ways. For instance, what is that? The dog. Um, there's a scene with the dog and the doll, right?
Mhm.
And the doll that looks like Gigi.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so the idea, right, the little mini adventure in the middle of the film where Gigi has to pretend to be the doll while Kiki is off trying to find the real doll that has fallen into the
Yeah, yeah.
forest somewhere. And so the whole suspense is that the dog is there, and what's Gigi gonna do? Because there's this huge hulking dog that senses Gigi, who's a real cat. So, oh my goodness, and he's sweating. But in the end, the dog's like one of the nicest characters in the whole film, you
Yeah,
know?
and it's so subtly done. There's like he doesn't even
I,
make a sound in the whole film. Like, he's just very just quiet, and the way he like moves just it imbues it with the sense of character of he's a little bit older, but he's kind and just more than willing to help out this cat. I really love
yeah,
that. It's a very memorable moment with a character that has no dialogue and not even that much expression. Really, it's just I don't know something about the way he's able to draw these characters. I mean, not even literally, just the way that they're put together and conceived really works. And with the baker, I like the scene when Gigi is first comes into the bakery and he sees the baker and he's a little bit intimidated. And the baker's like a bit standoffish, and then he's spinning around these things or something, and he kind of
yeah,
looks over with like a little subtle kind of playful kind of, oh, yeah, see that? See, look, showing off almost. So that's another cool mini moments, and the film is full of those things. And Ursula
yeah.
is a character that kind of pivotal, even though she's a very minor part in terms of just the running time and how long she's in the movie. But what I really appreciate is that final scene with Kiki and Ursula when they're staying up and chatting in the night. And it could be it is a scene where Kiki kind of learns to again get her mojo back a little bit and to kind of see things from a different perspective, an older perspective perhaps. She's been really down in the dumps, and it kind of lifts her out of it. In a way, just going out and being with someone else probably helps her. But they have a little chat, and nothing really profound is said in that chat. Maybe you could say that it is, but it so easily could have dipped into like, Kiki, you need to do this, you need to learn how to be this. Like it could have been like a very obvious scene where she's trying to help her through things. She does it in a very matter-of-fact way where she's just talking about just the way things are, and I don't remember the dialogue specifically because I don't think it is that particularly in your face, but nevertheless just that very subtle discussion helps her, and again I appreciate that.
Yes, and it was Kiki who provided the inspiration for Ursula to paint that lovely depiction of Kiki flying in the sky, right?
Yeah.
The nighttime sky. And so it comes down to what are the things that inspire us, or what are the things that push us forward? And they don't have to be deep, profound things, but they can be little things or just everyday things. And it's a lovely moment because Ursula is saying to her, you were my inspiration for this work. And so I just love that subtlety between the two of them there. It's I agree with you. It's such a moving scene in such a non-flashy way.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of hard to kind of summarize it, but that's kind of it. Yeah, it's that kind of feeling, I think. And most of the movie for me is like that, which goes back to when I first watched it, and I was just not expecting it to have that level of depth. But again, to the point where I don't feel like it's that apparent. Or maybe it is, but it's not very overt. That's the way I think is the depth isn't kind of thrown out there. It's there if you want to look for it and receive it, but it works on a couple of different levels in that sense. And it's a stunning film visually, which is no surprise at this point with these films and Miyazaki in general. And the score, I think, is wonderful. Like I love the music. It's so bouncy and light and fitting to the story and the feel of it. It's not as sweeping or as emotional as some of Hisaishi's other scores, but it's so fitting to even the setting. Just hearing that music makes me think of the sea and makes me think of a seaside town and just nice happy times. And then the scene with Ursula, there's a really, I don't even know how I could even describe that piece of music, but when she sees the painting and they're talking in the night, that piece of music is so beautiful. It's a very short piece, but it's just a really, really nice one.
And what do you think of the opening credits song and the closing credits song? There are two songs there. At least I'm not as familiar with the English version as I am with the Japanese version.
Well, I haven't heard an English version, so wait, no, maybe I have. I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, the songs I think are different. I think.
Well, I only watched the Japanese version, so I'm not.
Yes.
But anyway, the first song I can remember. The credit song I don't recall from memory, even though I watched it again a week ago. But the opening credit song I quite like. It's again more of a kind of bouncy, kind of fun, beginning to an adventure kind of song that feels quite appropriate. And I always like it when they kind of, if it's done well, where in a movie a song is playing and then suddenly it becomes a part of the frame where she turns down the radio, so it's her song that she's listening to. So makes it a bit more involving knowing that's the song she's listening to as she's flying out, so it kind of feels like it's going along with her in that sense.
Oh, those are great songs. Yeah, Yuming is the singer, and she's a very famous singer here in Japan. Actually, I was walking not so far from my home here, and I was walking, and I was just walking by a house, and my friend says, "Oh, that's where Yuming lives." It's like, "What? Are you kidding me? Wow, that's amazing!" So, What was it? I love those songs. I think those songs are so lovely. I think they're, for me, those two songs in Kiki's Delivery Service are among, if I had to do a ranking of the Ghibli songs, I think those would be very easily in my top five.
Mm. And I love the setting. It's kind of a, kind of a European town, kind of not, lots of inspirations from different places. On the Blu-ray, there's a featurette of a presenter going around to different places in Sweden, where they
Oh
kind of
yeah. Oh.
they kind of. I think Miyazaki first went there to get inspiration for a Pippi Longstocking, either movie or TV series, which never ended up happening. And so he remembered those locations, and then I think sent a team to take more pictures. And so they visit some of those locations, and it's quite shocking, really, when you look at some of these streets in Sweden that they went to in this little featurette, and it looks almost exactly like, like the down to like the bridge that she flies under. It's like it's an actual bridge, and it almost looks exactly the same. So really, really interesting. I think there's more of those documentaries where they visit real life locations that inspired certain landscapes in Ghibli films. But as far as I'm aware, the only one that has been ported with an English subtitle track in the English speaking market has been that one for Kiki.
Interesting. How is the, could you explain briefly the Blu-ray release that you have? I'd be very curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I brought the ones that I have. Just as soon as we did it with the Porco Rosso one, I assume that we'll just kind of show the editions that we have. I have the regular UK Blu-ray release. This is Studio Canal, nice cover. It's a Blu-ray and DVD. And I haven't gone through all the special features, but there are, of course, the feature-length storyboards if you want to watch that stuff.
Yeah.
A bunch of like interviews and kind of mini featurettes, nothing too lengthy. The locations is like about half an hour long. It is actually a really good one. The making of the English dub with Kirsten Dunst and Phil Hartman, etc., and the original Japanese trailers. So yeah.
Oh wow, that's great.
But I also
That's
have, and then this is a really frivolous double dip here. It's the Steelbook version. So I haven't even opened this one yet, but
wow.
I have, I forget which ones. When I first started collecting these Blu-rays, the Steelbooks had just come out. So I bought, I think, what were the ones I started with? Ponyo, Nausicaa. There's a few of them, and this was like another wave of them that came out. And I thought I got to get it to go along with the set, but I haven't opened it. Do I need it? I really don't. Why do I have it? I don't know. I felt compelled to buy it, and it's kind of ridiculous. But those are the two that I have for Kiki.
Are all the Ghibli films on available in the Steelbook releases as well?
No, it's a very weird, like I think like years, it must have been 5 years ago when I bought the first wave. And then like a year afterwards, they did two more. And then after a couple more years, another two. So they haven't done all of them. They've recently released a Porco one, which I didn't buy actually, believe it or not. But yeah, so I have, there's that one, and I'll probably show them as we go through all of these. But there's definitely Nausicaa, Mononoke, Spirited Away, I think. Most of Miyazaki's films have been done. And I think they've just started doing other ones like Grave of the Fireflies, and all with that same kind of silver circular design on the front. So they're kind of cool. They're kind of a little bit divisive, I think, in the Blu-ray collecting community. Some people think they look really ugly and don't like them at all, but I quite like them. So
yeah. Are there spine numbers to them?
Yeah, that's, oh god, I don't think we got into that before. Maybe we did, but
yeah. I'm unfamiliar with this. I know a little bit about this, but maybe you could help explain this to me. What's the issue with the spine numbers?
I don't know. So Kiki is number 5. Can't even see it on camera, but the Kiki is number 5. But I have no idea what they were thinking. They obviously started releasing these films. They numbered them. I think they just numbered them in the order they released them, not in the order the films came out. And then they started changing it again. So I literally at one point had a copy of My Neighbors, the Yamadas. Is that what it's called? Or what is it called? The Takahata film. So that film was on Blu-ray in a shop, and I picked it up. I looked at the spine number, and then I picked up another one, looked at the spine number, and they were both different. So I have no idea what the issue is there. So I don't even look at them when I put them on the shelf. It's just chronological, and I just don't think about it because they've messed it up a few times, and yeah. There's no order, I think, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. Yeah, it probably would have been better not to have spine numbers at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and if you do, just chronological. Why, it's
yeah,
just makes sense. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, that's too bad. Let's see. What do I have? Hold on. Just give me 1 second. Let me pull my Japanese
yeah,
DVD or Blu-ray. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, so there's this box here, this Blu-ray box in Japan, and this is the Miyazaki box. Included in this set, of course, is Kiki, which is right here.
that's nice.
It's nice, but unfortunately the supplements are actually not so good in the sense that there aren't any supplements.
Oh,
And
right.
so, yeah, so this box set is, let's see, there is a separate disc. There are separate special discs, but they don't necessarily go into any supplementary material with respect to Kiki's delivery service. Now, there are other individual releases of these Blu-rays in Japan. I think, for instance, I think you have
Yeah,
one of the individual releases for Porco Rosso, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, that's right.
And so I think there are, I'm not too much of an expert on this, but I think there are some slight extras on those individual releases that aren't necessarily included in this particular box set. So there are actually a lot of weaknesses
Mm.
when it comes to this particular box set. But, um, you know, that is making me think maybe it's worth it to get some of the non-Japanese releases of the Ghibli films. But I'm not the biggest expert when it comes to what is included on what release and what isn't. But um,
Yeah,
uh,
it's kind of fairly hit and miss with Studio Canal in terms of how many special features they bring over. But with the Kiki one, there is quite a few. Again, I haven't gone through all of them, but compared to some, there is quite a bit more than usual. And again, that locations documentary is just a really fun
mm,
time. So I like that quite a bit.
mm,
Yeah, I guess we should talk very briefly about the English dub, because we talked about it before. The whole Phil Hartman, the great Phil Hartman voicing Gigi,
mm,
which to me just completely feels out of character, and I just kind of
mm.
it just doesn't fit for me. But you said that your opinion had changed, if I'm not mistaken, or at
Oh
least
yes,
your opinion had slightly changed, at least.
I hated the Phil Hartman voice of for Gigi when I first heard it. And I can't say that I really love it now, but I think I've mellowed out a little bit when it comes to my opinion of Phil Hartman's Gigi.
Yeah,
And nothing against Phil Hartman. I think Phil Hartman great, sorely missed,
of course.
but just as a fit to Gigi, it's just a uh, uh, it just didn't work for me at the time. Now I think if we think about Gigi and Kiki as a kind of point counterpoint relationship, I think there's nothing. There's no stronger counterpoint to Kirsten Dunst than Phil Hartman. So I think in that context, I think his voice works. It's adequate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, adequate's a good way. But yeah, it's not
Yeah,
terrible. It's just not for me.
yeah.
It just doesn't seem to fit quite well. But
Mm.
I haven't watched the whole film with the English dub, I have to admit. I think I saw maybe like the first 10 minutes or something like that. So, yeah, not too much to say about the English dub this time around. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, any closing thoughts you have about Kiki? I'm sure there's other things that again, we could go deep and dissect every little thing, but I mean, there's only so much time in the world. So,
Yeah, I think just as a closing thing, I can honestly say that this is my favorite Ghibli film. That could change, of course.
yeah,
What
yeah,
your favorite film is, of course, can change over time. I understand that, but as it stands now, this is my favorite, absolute favorite film from Studio Ghibli. There are some close seconds, of course,
mm,
but this one is, I think, so perfect because it's so imperfect. I don't know if that makes sense, but I love its imperfections. I think its imperfections just augment the power of the film to me all the more. And I love its I love the fact that it's subtle and yet it doesn't stop to explain every single detail to you. I love the fact that on its surface, it has a kind of a beginning, middle, and then end that seems clean, that seems neat, and that seems finite in terms of its narrative arc and structure. And it ends perfectly with the dirigible rescue and all that. But the fact of the matter is that it's a completely much more complicated film than that simple narrative structure might otherwise imply. Of course, that therefore means that the film can be many things to many people. And if people want to watch it and just enjoy it for what it is and have fun with that narrative arc, I think that's great. If people want to watch it and look at other things that might be suggestive of things that are outside of the film frame, I think that's great too. Which is why I think it is a true gem in Japanese cinema.
Yeah. Its power is that it works in those different ways, and that it doesn't work on just the very simple story, kids movie kind of thing, or a story that deals with emotions and growing up in a bit more of a serious manner. It's neither one or the other. It's both things at the same time, and you can get both elements out of it, depending on your age, depending on where you are in your life. And so yeah, it just works on a couple of levels, which is really like I said, the first time I watched it was really surprising. And so for me, I would say it's a very close second favorite, actually, just underneath Porco Rosso. But I don't know. I could see myself this being my number one over time. I don't know. There's something about it that is just, I don't watch it too much. I like to savor it. I like to leave it a few years and come back to it and be like, oh, this is so great to return back to this.
Yes.
The feeling that I get. And I was speaking to Connie about it. I think we did a video actually that will go up at some point in the future, getting her thoughts on it. And she's saying, that this is a story that not much happens in. And I said, yeah, but I think what the film does, it takes what a normal film might use, like exciting moments in a plot or things to really grip you into the story, and it exchanges those things for charm. One of the main things I think about the film is it's just so charming. It's just again on the surface. Obviously, as we get deeper into the story, there's more kind of elements with Kiki's kind of episode in the middle there, where she kind of goes through some negative feelings. But overall, as a complete package, it's just such a wonderful film. It's one of the most quote unquote wonderful films I've ever seen, because I can't imagine anyone watching this and not feeling good at the end of it. And also if if you're inclined to actually get something out of it by the end as well, even if you are an adult, not just for people who are growing up and going through those same things. I can look at that and just remember how I felt when I was that young, and it makes me appreciate how things turned out and so on and so forth. So yeah, it just works on so many different levels, and I think is one of his best films, and maybe even a little bit underrated. I know that it's thought of very highly, but I think it's almost more impressive than some of his more lauded films, because I feel like it works better without being as showy about it, if that makes any kind of sense. So yeah.
That's a great way of expressing it. I really love how you put it. Yeah, that's great.
All right, so if I think that's pretty much all we've got to say for now, anyway, about Kiki's delivery service. So thank you once again, and we appreciate you watching and commenting. And this will, be very much when we can do it basis. There's no schedule or anything. But thanks again for doing this, man. It's always fun to talk about these films with you. And
my pleasure. The pleasure is all mine, my friend. It's so much fun to talk with you.
And we'll see you all in the next one. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.
Bye-bye.